If you don't have that, you don't have a program that's going to last. The biggest problem we have with people with disabilities is we don't have that involvement. We can't get people to get off the duff and say, okay, for this program to work, for our CERN program to work, or Joe's Magic program to work, people need to come out and say, okay, what can I do to make this thing happen?
Do you believe that's because in the disability studies area we talk about the idea of dependency and stigmatization that goes on? Do you believe that that is embedded in the people, and do you witness that in the peer mentoring program you have? Or, Levon, so you could tell us about what your program is doing, since we're on the subject of programs?
What I think mostly is these people are not just, I mean, some of them is probably just, you know, just getting accustomed to being hurt. I mean, it takes a while to get over the fact
so many
that you've
people
been
are
shot.
consumed with their own problems, with their own issues, that their whole idea of being able to get involved in a program that might not directly and immediately impact what they're doing becomes sort of second rate, or it's like, okay, I'll do that when I get around to it. And so he's absolutely right. That's the number one hurdle. Disability also, to really understand disabilities, you have to break it, I think, into three categories, Tony and everybody. You break it into the always beens, people who've been disabled all their lives.
Go ahead.
People who are suddenly disabled, like Levon was, and then people who are gradually disabled, like actually the bulk of people who are disabled.
One of the things we talk about quite often is that with the aging of the baby boomer community, one of the states you do get to in old age, is my dad being 100 years old before he passed, is we all hope to end up in that category of being elderly and disabled, otherwise we'll be under the ground. You know, but that experience is important, and we're hoping that eventually those baby boomers will join in.
Well, it's also very different from I mean, there are a lot of people who are gradually disabled at 20. You know, you got a whole cycle of, and the mindset that goes into that is totally different. I mean, my world of disability is, I don't know, I mean, I'm cool with who I am. I've been the way I am all my life. This is what it is. It works for me. I know what it is. I know that the bulk of problems that I'm having are problems that when I look at personal problems, they're problems which basically have more to do with the perception of society with regards to me and my being visually distinguished. Other people who's suddenly disabled, I mean, the nightmare of trying to recover from that and try to get a grip on what's going on and come to terms with it, you don't have an okay, all of a sudden you woke up tomorrow morning and your life is totally different. So every psychological wingnut that goes on in your head, every switch that goes on, every light that goes on is like, okay, well, this is different. What am I going to do now? The gradually spends its time denying, you know.
Could you tell us a little bit more about your story in terms of the experience with the mentors and mentees, to get a feel for some of the people there that really wouldn't understand what that whole process is like?
Okay, so my personal story, like I said, I was hurt young. I rehabbed, went to the hospital. I stayed like 29 days in the rehab. My first concern was when I was going home. That's the average concern of anyone with a disability. That's with a spinal cord injury. Also, from just with our program mentoring and the effect that it have on older people, from my experience, is totally different than someone young. When someone that's over 25, that's worked their regular everyday life, it affects them differently, because I look at it from the standpoint where when you're just a teenager, it's not much that you've done already in your life. So I'm not justifying it saying it's okay to be hurt younger, but add to what he's saying, it's like being born with a disability. But when you're 30 years old and you was shot down, mistaken identity in the crossfire, whatever the case may be, it's a culture shock to you, because just yesterday you were just walking around functioning, going in and out of town. So it's more of a mental thing than it is so much a physical. So as of over the last maybe 5-6 years working with people with disability, old and young, we basically like trying to bridge that gap where the rubber meet the road at, where there's services that the state provides for people with disability. Magic have been that bridge to try to get these people back into society, get back in their community, get active with life. And some of the people, like I said, like Joe said earlier, educational-wise, they haven't been out of the 8th grade. They barely could read or read their name in cursive. You know, we come across a lot of those things because in the inner city, I'm quite sure you all know that it's people being shot every night, possibly.
Some days worse than Baghdad in the weekends,
ain't no
which
question
is just terrible.
There's no question of that. also, I'm a part of an organization called Ceasefire that does the hospital respond for Christ Hospital. And the last 5 years, we've seen over 600 patients per year. So there's no question in my mind that, you know, it's bigger than Bad Dad here in Chicago. My concern and my focus more be on the ones with spinal cord injury. Now that I'm with Magic, we try to help those people get accolade back in society. We try to, you know, encourage them to go back to school, get in school. But bigger than all that, it's more of a housing problem than it is so much of employment. It's easy to say, come on, go get a job. But when you're concerned about getting in and out your house, you got concern about where you're going to stay tomorrow.
Shelter's of primary importance.
Visibility.
So I think we would have to really back up a whole lot to say, we have to back up a lot of steps to say employment. You know what I'm saying? Employment is not the number one thing.
Just getting a roof over your head.
Basically, it's more housing. I mean,
And that's the piece that policy doesn't understand. So when policy is written for an employment program, they're not taking in consideration all the concrete needs that people have to get a stable job and maintain a stable job. So you have transportation, you have food. Some of these young men, like Levon is a father himself. So how are you going to provide for your family? Then you have your normal health care needs associated with the disability. The issue that we have with the population that we serve, which is primarily black males, is the stigma associated with it. So it really doesn't matter if they're wheelchair users, whether they've been gunshot victims or not, because they could have been born with a disability and be a wheelchair user, or they could have been in a car accident and been a wheelchair user. But when service providers look at them, they look at them as if they were gang members and were gunshot victims, and they treat them as such. We found that when workers go to their homes to service them, they treat them as such. We found that when they need to try to go get, and that's another issue, is that to get services, they can't just go one place and get the services. They have to go several different places to get food stamps, get health care, to get in
So
school.
you think there should be centralized service providers for that?
one-stop shop.
Definitely
Really?
should be.
You know, to add to that too, to me, from my personal experience and
That's why
working
you're
with
here.
people with disability, it's crazy to me that a person could have a spinal cord injury, say he was shot yesterday, today, whatever day it was. He have to wait in the hospital to get approved for Social Security. But before Social Security approve him for being disabled now, he's discharged from the hospital because there's only a limited time that you can stay in the hospital now. So it's approximately 30 days. There are hospitals that's not even allowed to have paraplegics on the floor with public aid.
Wow.
You
Is
know,
that all a result of budget cuts?
budgets. So the turnaround, my concern now is the turnaround time. It's so much red tape, it's so much paperwork. Now you got to send to Springfield, and someone in Springfield got to look over and say, okay, now you're paralyzed, now you're eligible for Social Security. Okay, now you got the Social Security, now it takes you another 90 days to get a medical card or a food stamp, and the medical card only allowing you to have medical supplies. When you leave the hospital and you're paralyzed, I mean, there's the wheelchair, by the demand of a wheelchair, it takes, you're only allowed to have a new wheelchair every 7 years. So it's a lot of things that's beyond the surface of. I mean, you can see me looking in a wheelchair, I may be nice dressed, or guys you may see that's nicely dressed, but to say, well, we're gonna fund you all just to mentor 30 people for 2 years, 3 years, it's way beyond just mentoring the person. It's way beyond unemployment, trying to stir them to go get a job.
So the problem, though, is you're talking about a one-stop shop, both you guys, and I respect that. And I would just say this: well, then here's where I see here's where the flag comes up for me. So if you think that a one-stop shop should be a way to work with this, then and maybe you're doing this, but then maybe what you did do is put one together. Because the fact is, these programs work on separate trains because, first of all, they're not talking to each other.
And silos are a really big issue. Everybody's just got television to accomplish
Right.
the mission for their department.
They're
and that's
locked
it.
into a sort of here's what I'm charged with the responsibility of doing. We saw this. This is why we put CERN together. We realized that there were a lot of people talking about various aspects of self-employment, but they were like, because they didn't see what other people were trying to do or they didn't understand it, they thought they had to do it all. What we figured out is, no, you do your part, we'll coordinate it. If you want to have one-stop shops, which I totally agree with you on, Levon, that's the problem, is then what has to happen is somebody needs to put that together. It's not going to come from, reform doesn't start from the top. You deal me 4 aces, I'm not going to ask for a redeal. Reform starts at the bottom, where I don't like the way things are, and I'm going to do something to affect the change here. So it seems like that's where if I were you guys, because I'm not you guys, and I'm honestly not, I'm in a different world. If I were you guys, though, the first thing I'd be looking at is, wow, we need a one-stop shop. Let's put something together. Let's put proposals together that make sense. It takes time and it takes effort, but I think these are the kind of things, I know these are the kind of things that especially state services are really looking for right now.
I can speak firsthand. We've partnered with the state with this program I'm talking about, with federal and state dollars. And I'm quite sure you all familiar. We've worked hand in hand with some of these programs. It's all a good talk. I mean, to be honest, when you talk about a population with people with disability, it's beyond what you can pay me or what it's worth to me, because I'm that person. I've lived this from experience. I see it at least once a month. I meet and talk to someone with a new disability, a new acquired injury. What I'm saying to you all, not just so much of a one-stop shop. I mean, anyone that knows about working with people with disability or working in the hospital, have the privilege to the hospital, it's a known fact that you got to be approved for Social Security.
Gotcha.
If the doctor already diagnosed you as a spinal cord injury, is the doctor being checked on? Is it another special doctor that's in Springfield that gives the approval to say, okay, that's where Social Security starts, from Springfield, so they send a letter to Springfield, and then I guess another group of doctors say it's okay. But I'm saying right in Springfield is where public aid starts.
I understand that.
So when I say one-stop
I'm glad
shop,
you're able
I'm
to
saying,
share that with us all.
Yeah.
And if we could just take a little time to summarize our thoughts for the audience as we wrap up. Sean, if you have any just few thoughts you want to have people take away from this conversation.
Well, what I want to emphasize, like Levon, the importance of making partnerships, like we have, with community-based organizations, with the hospital, with the actual individuals and the researchers and the universities. We need all of those groups to work together, as well, especially the government, because alone is failure.
As Dave talked about, I mean, there needs to be a model created. We're trying to create that model, but there needs to be investment put into the model, and that investment can't just come from government. There has to be an investment from corporate and private donations as well to make this happen. People have to see this as a viable population, because everybody in our society counts. So,
thank you. And Dave?
There are numerous opportunities for people with disabilities to find programs or rally together, try to focus on the things, the specific aspects of their lives that they think are important, and convert the thinking process from one that says, I'm going to be looking to these other service agencies and entities to provide them, and in fact organize themselves so that they can provide those services internally. And they'll find, I think if they do that, like every other minority movement has found through the years, that's really where the beef is. If you want to get your wheels on the road and get things to work, you have to start from the bottom up, and you have to build a model that works. And if you do it, people will buy into it.
Thank you, guys. We hold equality as an integral value in our society, but the maintenance of equality is hard work. It requires compassion, a sense of fairness, and above all, a willingness to listen to the diversity of voices in our society. We hope this episode can be a starting point. For the professors, I'm Antonio Vasquez.